The morning that changed everything. The early morning light filtered weakly through the blinds in Mary Kellerman's bedroom. It was September 29, 1982, and Elk Grove Village, a quiet suburb northwest of Chicago, was still wrapped in the hush of dawn. Mary was only 12 years old, a bright, kind-hearted seventh grader who loved riding her bike to the nearby park. That morning she woke with a sore throat and a runny nose. Her father, Dennis, called to her from the kitchen as he poured a cup of coffee. "Take some Tylenol, sweetie. You'll feel better before school," he said. Mary shuffled into the bathroom, grabbed the familiar white and red bottle from the medicine cabinet, and twisted the cap open. The sound of the capsules rattling inside was as ordinary as the sound of rain on a window. She swallowed one with a sip of water. By 7 a.m., the Kellerman household was in chaos. Mary had collapsed in her bedroom. Her breathing was shallow, her skin pale. Paramedics rushed her to the hospital, but within hours she was gone. The doctors were baffled. A healthy 12-year-old had simply died. The Kellermans grieved, unaware that elsewhere in the Chicago area, a chain of events had already begun that would send the entire nation into a panic. That same morning, in the Arlington Heights home of Adam Janis, a 27-year-old postal worker, a sudden tragedy was unfolding. Adam had taken a Tylenol for what he thought was a minor ache after work. Within minutes, he collapsed in his kitchen. At Northwest Community Hospital, doctors declared him dead from what appeared to be a sudden heart attack. But the horror wasn't over. Later that day, in Adam's grief-stricken home, his younger brother Stanley and Stanley's wife Teresa went to the kitchen to take something for their pounding headaches. They, too, reached for the same Tylenol bottle Adam had used. Within hours, both were dead. 3 lives from one family, gone in a single day. By now, whispers were moving through the city. Nurses and paramedics spoke in quiet, urgent tones. "Something's not right," one ER nurse told another. "These aren't random." At the Chicago Tribune's newsroom, the phones began ringing. Reporters scribbled details on notepads, their desks cluttered with typewriters, paper coffee cups, and cigarettes smoldering in ashtrays. A breaking headline began to form: 3 dead in mysterious circumstances. Back in Elk Grove Village, the Kellermans received a call from local authorities. Detectives asked about the morning's events, every detail from Mary's breakfast to the moment she collapsed. When they heard about the Tylenol, they made a note, but at first, it didn't seem like a smoking gun. In Arlington Heights, police were beginning to draw connections. The Janis deaths seemed almost impossible to explain. The hospital staff mentioned a troubling detail. Adam and Stanley had both been treated within hours of each other, and both had recently taken Tylenol. By late afternoon, Cook County's chief medical examiner, Dr. Edmund Donahue, received a call from a colleague. The theory was chilling: could the Tylenol itself be poisoned? That evening, in the Chicago Police Department's homicide unit, an evidence table began to fill with ordinary-looking pill bottles. Detectives, some in rumpled suits, others in windbreakers, leaned over the table as crime lab technicians in latex gloves began opening the capsules. The smell hit them first: sharp, bitter, chemical. Cyanide. The discovery spread through the department like wildfire. Someone had deliberately laced Tylenol capsules with potassium cyanide. And those bottles weren't all in one place. They had been purchased from different stores, in different neighborhoods. It was a nightmare scenario. The most trusted over-the-counter painkiller in America had been turned into a silent weapon. At midnight, the first press conferences began. Television crews lit up the parking lot outside the police station. Under the harsh glare of camera lights, officials urged the public, do not take any Tylenol products until further notice. The next morning, Chicago awoke to front-page headlines in bold black letters. Pharmacies yanked Tylenol from their shelves. Police cars cruised neighborhoods with loudspeakers blaring warnings. Shoppers stood in store aisles staring at empty shelves where medicine used to be. In kitchens and living rooms, families stared at the small white bottles in horror, wondering if death was sitting in their cabinets. The city was in shock, and the killer was still out there. The city on edge. The morning of September 30, 1982, broke with the sound of urgency in every corner of Chicago. Radios crackled with warnings, television anchors spoke in tense voices, and headlines screamed a chilling truth: 7 people dead after taking Tylenol. Inside the Cook County Medical Examiner's office, Dr. Edmund Donahue stared at the toxicology reports. The cyanide levels were off the charts. Each capsule contained enough poison to kill several adults. These deaths weren't just tragic. They were deliberate murders. Across town at the Chicago Police Department's headquarters, the homicide division was overflowing with activity. Detectives worked phones, runners delivered subpoenas, and clerks processed an endless stream of paperwork. Evidence bags containing Tylenol bottles, receipts, and pharmacy records piled high on tables. Captain Robert O'Leary called his team together. "We're looking at product tampering on a scale we've never seen," he told them. "We have no suspect, no motive, and no idea how many more bottles are out there. Every second counts." The strategy was simple but overwhelming: identify where each poisoned bottle came from, trace its path from manufacturer to store shelf, and warn the public before more people died. That same morning, reporters descended on Johnson & Johnson's local distribution center. The company's most popular product, trusted by millions, had become the epicenter of a national emergency. Public relations representatives, pale and tight-lipped, tried to answer questions while fielding calls from the corporate headquarters in New Brunswick, New Jersey. By midday, Johnson & Johnson executives made a stunning decision: a full nationwide recall of Tylenol, pulling more than 31 million bottles off shelves. It would cost the company over $100 million, but there was no other choice. In pharmacies across Chicago, shelves stood bare where Tylenol once sat. Pharmacists answered anxious questions from customers who clutched bottles in their hands, unsure whether to throw them away or hand them to police. One pharmacist in Arlington Heights described the surreal scene to a Tribune reporter: "It's like we're giving out live grenades. People are afraid to even touch the stuff." In grocery stores, customers hesitated at checkout lines, staring at other shoppers' baskets. In neighborhoods, people knocked on doors to warn their neighbors. In homes, medicine cabinets were emptied into garbage cans. Meanwhile, the investigation deepened. Detectives began tracing each victim's last purchase. They found that the poisoned bottles had been bought from different stores, including Jewel and Osco drug locations across the city's suburbs. This ruled out a problem at the manufacturing plant. It meant the tampering likely happened after the bottles left the factory. Crime lab technicians examined the packaging. In some cases, the seals were intact, suggesting the killer had carefully resealed the bottles after lacing the capsules. Whoever did this was meticulous, patient, and utterly without conscience. Back in the newsroom of the Chicago Tribune, veteran crime reporter George Papajohn typed furiously at his desk. His sources inside the police department were telling him the same thing over and over: they had no suspect. There was no ransom note, no political message, no claim of responsibility. "What kind of person poisons strangers at random?" one detective told him. "That's not just murder. That's terror." The terror wasn't confined to Chicago. By October 1, news outlets across the country carried the story. From New York to Los Angeles, households checked their medicine cabinets. The FDA and the FBI joined the investigation, bringing in federal resources and forensic experts. Special Agent Louis Myers of the FBI's Chicago field office arrived with his team to coordinate with local authorities. "We're dealing with a crime that could happen anywhere," he told O'Leary. "And until we find this person, every bottle is a potential weapon." That night, as the city's skyline glowed under the haze of streetlights, Chicago felt different. The hum of everyday life was laced with unease. Parents double-checked everything their children touched. Elderly couples stood in pharmacy aisles, asking clerks for something safe. The killer was still out there, blending into the city's millions of faces. Maybe they were watching the news. Maybe they were walking past the very stores that had sold their poisoned bottles. And for the first time in America's consumer history, the question wasn't just who did it, it was how do we make sure it never happens again. The hunt begins. By October 2, 1982, Chicago had transformed into the headquarters of one of the largest criminal investigations in U.S. history. The FBI, FDA, local police departments, and Johnson & Johnson executives all crowded into makeshift command centers, each wall plastered with maps, supply chain diagrams, and victim timelines. Every victim's final day was reconstructed minute by minute. Investigators mapped which store each Tylenol bottle came from, then compared delivery logs. But the results were maddening: different stores, different delivery trucks, no single distribution point. The forensic angle. At the Illinois State Crime Lab, technicians worked around the clock under buzzing fluorescent lights. The cyanide was pure, lethal, and in amounts that pointed to someone with chemical knowledge. They examined the capsules under magnification. Tiny traces of crystalline residue clung to the inside of the gelatin shells. One technician, veteran chemist Linda Jacobs, noticed something unusual. "Look here," she told her colleague, pointing to faint scratch marks inside a capsule. This wasn't machine-filled. Someone opened it by hand. The lab also determined that the tampering was likely done locally. The shipping and handling records showed that the poisoned bottles reached the stores intact from the manufacturer. That meant the killer had to buy Tylenol, poison the capsules, reseal the bottles, and return them to store shelves, all without being caught. The public watch line. To catch the suspect, authorities opened a hotline for tips. It lit up instantly. Callers reported suspicious neighbors, strange smells in garages, and people seen handling Tylenol bottles in stores. One call stood out. A jewel store employee in Lombard, Illinois, remembered a man in his late 30s returning a bottle of Tylenol the week before the murders began. The man was calm, polite, and said the capsules looked funny. The store manager took the bottle back without question. Now, that detail sent shivers through investigators. A letter arrives. On October 5, the story took a darker twist. The Chicago Tribune received a typed letter addressed to Johnson & Johnson. In it, the writer claimed responsibility for the Tylenol murders and demanded $1 million to stop the killings. The letter was signed simply, "Tylenol Killer." The FBI treated it as potentially genuine. After all, they'd seen killers taunt police before. But was it a real confession, or just a hoax meant to exploit public fear? The suspect, James W. Lewis. The investigation quickly focused on a man named James W. Lewis. Originally from New York, Lewis had a criminal record for fraud and had recently been involved in a bitter dispute with a Chicago area business. His name surfaced when the letter demanding money was traced to a postmark in New York. FBI agents tracked Lewis down in Manhattan. He denied killing anyone but admitted to sending the extortion letter. His explanation? He claimed he was trying to frame his wife's former employer as revenge for an unpaid debt. The FBI didn't buy his innocence entirely, but without physical evidence linking him to the poisoned bottles, they had nothing to charge him with for the murders. Lewis was eventually convicted of extortion and sentenced to 20 years in prison, but the Tylenol killings remained unsolved. For the public, his arrest was both a relief and a disappointment: relief that someone was in custody, disappointment that the murders themselves were still a mystery. Fear spreads beyond Chicago. As days passed, copycat scares began to emerge in other states. People reported finding strange substances in other over-the-counter medicines. Most turned out to be false alarms, but the damage was done. Americans had lost trust in their medicine cabinets. Johnson & Johnson moved fast to repair that trust. The company announced it would redesign Tylenol packaging to include triple seal protection, a glued box, a plastic seal over the bottle's neck, and a foil seal over the mouth of the bottle itself. This was groundbreaking. No over-the-counter medicine had such packaging before. The human cost. For the families of the victims, the investigation's pace was agonizing. Dennis Kellerman, Mary's father, attended press conferences but rarely spoke. When asked what justice would look like, he said quietly, "It won't bring her back. But I want them to know what they did. I want them to be afraid, every day." The Janus family in Arlington Heights, still reeling from the loss of 3 relatives, avoided the cameras entirely. A local priest spoke for them, saying the community had been shaken to its soul. By mid-October, the official death toll stood at 7. The fear had spread to every corner of the country. Pharmacies posted warning signs. Police cars made daily rounds near drugstores. In some homes, Tylenol became a symbol of betrayal, the ordinary turned lethal. Chicago had seen gang wars, organized crime, and political scandals. But this crime was different. It wasn't about power, territory, or revenge. It was about randomness. It could have been anyone, anywhere, at any time. And the killer was still free. The media storm and false trails. By mid-October 1982, the Tylenol murders had become a defining story not only for Chicago but for the entire nation. Television networks ran special segments, newspapers carried daily updates, and talk shows debated the terrifying reality of poison medicine. The media frenzy was relentless. Anchors repeated the warnings to avoid Tylenol and similar capsule products. Parents called into radio shows, anxious and angry. Pharmacies braced for angry customers demanding answers or refunds. Newsrooms working overtime. Inside the Chicago Tribune newsroom, desks were cluttered with papers, telephone lines buzzed non-stop, and reporters raced to piece together every scrap of information. Editor-in-chief William Parker called for extra staff and extended deadlines. "We're chasing leads, debunking rumors, and trying to keep the public informed without causing panic," he said during a late-night editorial meeting. "This is more than a story. It's a crisis." Public fear spirals. The city was gripped by fear. People stopped buying not only Tylenol but all capsule medications. Many switched to tablets or liquids, though no alternative felt completely safe. Mothers refused to let their children take any pills without checking every detail. In some neighborhoods, volunteers organized neighborhood watches around pharmacies, hoping to catch anyone seen suspiciously handling medicines. Some local governments considered banning capsule medicines outright. False leads flood the investigation. The pressure on the police and FBI mounted. Every tip had to be followed up, every suspicious package examined. Some leads were promising but ultimately dead ends. One man was arrested after being reported for acting strangely near a drugstore, but he was quickly released when no evidence was found. Meanwhile, crime labs scrambled to test thousands of Tylenol bottles returned from stores and customers. Most were safe, but a few contained suspicious substances that turned out to be harmless contaminants or lab errors. A vigilante panic. Fear led to extreme reactions. In some cases, innocent people faced accusations. A woman in a suburban town was confronted by neighbors after her son's cough medicine was mistaken for something dangerous. Rumors spread online, though primitive at the time, leading to harassment of local pharmacists. The city felt suffocated by suspicion and mistrust. Simple acts, like buying medicine, became fraught with anxiety. Johnson & Johnson's response. The company launched a massive public relations campaign. Television commercials featured reassuring messages from company executives, emphasizing their commitment to safety and the ongoing recall. They invited consumers to call a toll-free number with questions and concerns. In press conferences, the CEO, James Burke, appeared calm and resolute. "We are devastated by these deaths. Our priority is the safety of our customers. We will do everything possible to restore your trust." The rise of tamper-evident packaging. Perhaps the most lasting legacy of the crisis was the rapid development of tamper-evident packaging. Until then, no federal regulations required such protections for over-the-counter medicines. Johnson & Johnson's triple seal system became an industry standard, adopted by competitors and eventually mandated by the FDA. This innovation helped restore some confidence, but it also underscored the fact that before the murders, the public had no reason to worry about such dangers. Investigative frustration. Despite these efforts, the investigation remained frustratingly stalled. The killer left no fingerprints, no witnesses, no clear motive. Police profilers suggested the perpetrator might be a loner, possibly with a background in chemistry or pharmaceuticals. But no suspects fit the profile. Detective Captain Robert O'Leary expressed his frustration privately. "We're chasing shadows. It's like the city itself is holding its breath, waiting for answers we can't give. Families demand justice." At community meetings, families of the victims and concerned citizens gathered to demand progress. The Kellerman family and the Janus family made public pleas for anyone with information to come forward. "Someone out there knows something," Dennis Kellerman said during a local television interview. "We just want the person caught." A chilling reminder. In late October, another disturbing incident shook the city. A woman in a Chicago suburb found a Tylenol bottle on her doorstep, unopened but with a strange powder inside. Police tested the powder. It was harmless. Still, the message was clear. The killer or copycats might still be active. The city tightened security around drugstores and pharmaceutical warehouses. Surveillance cameras, rare at the time, were installed. Police increased patrols. The Tylenol murders weren't just a criminal case anymore, they had become a cultural trauma. They raised uncomfortable questions about trust, safety, and the vulnerability of everyday life. As October turned to November, Chicago hoped for answers that still seemed far out of reach. The cold trail and lasting impact. By late 1982, nearly 2 months after the first Tylenol death, the investigation showed signs of slowing. Despite the massive effort from local police, the FBI, and federal agencies, the killer remained elusive. Leads dried up, tips grew scarce, and the city's initial panic began to subside. The reality was harsh: no one had been charged with the murders. The poisoner, the person who had shattered the trust of millions, was still out there, hidden in plain sight. The investigation stalls. Detectives reviewed every piece of evidence again and again. The crime labs re-examined the cyanide traces, the tampered bottles, the shipping records. Nothing new emerged. The extortionist, James W. Lewis, was in prison for mailing the threat letter but had no direct connection to the poisonings. Interviews with witnesses failed to uncover any suspicious behavior that might point to the killer. Surveillance technology of the time was limited, and no fingerprints or DNA evidence had been recovered. The killer had been methodical, cautious, and cruel. Whoever they were, they'd planned the attacks carefully and managed to avoid detection. The victims remembered. Community memorials were held to honor the 7 victims. In Elk Grove Village, the Kellerman family placed a small plaque in their daughter Mary's memory. At churches and community centers across Chicago, vigils were held to acknowledge the tragedy. Though the killer was never caught, the families found solace in the public's outpouring of support. The city mourned together, united in grief and determination. Changing the face of consumer safety. One of the most significant outcomes of the Tylenol murders was the sweeping change in how medicines were packaged and regulated. Johnson & Johnson's swift nationwide recall and introduction of triple-seal packaging set a new industry standard. Other pharmaceutical companies followed suit, and by 1983, the FDA required tamper-evident packaging for over-the-counter products nationwide. This shift reassured the public that their safety mattered. The idea that anyone could secretly poison a medicine bottle became far less plausible. New laws and public awareness. The murders also influenced lawmakers. Several states passed laws making product tampering a federal crime with severe penalties. The public became more aware of the potential dangers of everyday products, leading to increased scrutiny of packaging and consumer safety. Schools and communities began educating children and adults about medicine safety, how to spot tampering, and the importance of reporting suspicious activity. A case study in crisis management. Johnson & Johnson's handling of the crisis became a textbook example of corporate responsibility. CEO James Burke's decision to recall every bottle of Tylenol, even at great financial cost, was praised for prioritizing public safety over profits. The company's transparency, communication, and quick action helped restore consumer confidence faster than many expected. Today, this case is studied in business schools around the world. Lessons for law enforcement. For the Chicago Police Department and the FBI, the Tylenol murders highlighted the challenges of investigating product tampering cases. The case led to improvements in interagency cooperation, evidence handling, and the use of forensic science in criminal investigations. New protocols for responding to tampering incidents were developed, emphasizing speed and public communication. These protocols have since been used in other cases involving poisoned or contaminated products. The lingering question. Decades later, the Chicago Tylenol murders remain officially unsolved. The identity of the poisoner is unknown, and many theories persist. Some speculate the killer had access to cyanide through a professional background, such as chemistry or pharmaceuticals. Others suggest a disturbed individual seeking notoriety. Despite advances in forensic science, no new credible leads have emerged. The case remains a haunting reminder of vulnerability in everyday life. Remembering the victims. The 7 victims, Mary Kellerman, Adam Janis, Stanley Janis, Teresa Janis, and 3 others, are remembered not just for how they died but for the changes their deaths inspired. Their tragedy led to safer medicine packaging, stricter laws, and greater awareness. In Chicago and across the country, they are a somber symbol of the cost of negligence and evil. Hope for the future. The Tylenol murders shaped how companies, law enforcement, and consumers think about safety and trust. The legacy is clear: vigilance is necessary, and the public must never take safety for granted. Though the killer was never caught, the tragedy pushed the nation forward, ensuring fewer people would suffer similar fates. Shadows and stories, the cultural echo. By the mid-1980s, the Tylenol murders had become more than a cold case; they were a part of American cultural memory. The shock of that fall in 1982 lingered, inspiring books, television dramas, and a growing number of conspiracy theories that tried to make sense of the senseless. The media's role in shaping the narrative. News coverage had initially been straightforward: breaking facts, urgent warnings, updates on the investigation. But as months passed and answers remained elusive, the media's tone shifted. The story became a symbol of random violence, the vulnerability of consumers, and the fragility of trust. Documentaries aired on local and national channels. True crime magazines dedicated special issues to the case, exploring theories and interviewing families. The killings were retold again and again, sometimes sensitively, other times sensationally. Conspiracy theories take hold. The lack of a solved case opened the door for speculation. Some suggested the murders were part of a larger criminal scheme, a way to damage Johnson & Johnson or manipulate stock prices. Others claimed corporate sabotage, possibly by competitors or disgruntled employees. More outlandish theories involved secret government experiments or cult activity. These ideas found their way into late-night talk shows and local legends, fueled by fear and the human need to explain tragedy. The case in fiction. Writers and filmmakers saw the Tylenol murders as a rich source of inspiration. Crime novels, television thrillers, and movies borrowed elements of the case: poisoned products, anonymous killers, panicked cities. While fictional, these stories kept the memory alive, shaping how generations understood product tampering and consumer safety. Some works aimed to educate, others to entertain, but all contributed to the case's enduring presence in American culture. Public paranoia and changing behavior. For years after the murders, many Americans remained wary of over-the-counter medicines. Parents carefully inspected packaging, and stores increased security measures. The case heightened public awareness about product safety beyond medicine to food, cosmetics, and household items. Some critics argued the heightened fear was disproportionate to the actual risk. Yet, the shift in consumer behavior showed the deep psychological impact of the murders. Trust, once lost, is hard to regain. The rise of consumer advocacy. In the wake of the murders, consumer advocacy groups gained new momentum. They lobbied for stronger regulations, better product labeling, and harsher penalties for tampering. These groups gave voice to those affected and worked to prevent future tragedies. Their efforts helped shape legislation and raise awareness nationwide, making consumer safety a mainstream issue. Technology and prevention. The case spurred innovation beyond packaging. Researchers developed new tamper-evident seals, chemical markers that could detect tampering, and early warning systems for contaminated products. In pharmaceutical manufacturing, stricter quality control measures were introduced. Industry standards raised the bar for safety, transparency, and accountability. Remembering the victims through education. Schools and communities incorporated lessons from the Tylenol murders into health education programs. Children learned about medication safety and the importance of alerting adults to suspicious products. These educational efforts aimed to empower the public, reducing fear through knowledge and vigilance. A lasting legacy. Though unsolved, the Tylenol murders left a profound mark. They reshaped public expectations for product safety and corporate responsibility. They forced law enforcement agencies to rethink investigation strategies for cases involving consumer products. More than anything, they served as a somber reminder of the need for constant vigilance in a world where ordinary things can hide deadly threats. Cold case, new tools. Decades after the terrifying events of 1982, the Chicago Tylenol murders remain officially unsolved, but the story has never been forgotten. Advances in forensic science and renewed interest from investigators and historians have kept the case alive in public memory and law enforcement files. The cold case status. By the early 2000s, the original investigation had gone cold. Many of the leads had been exhausted, witnesses' memories faded, and physical evidence degraded. Still, the Chicago Police Department kept the case open, hoping for new technology to provide answers. Detective Sarah Monroe, assigned to the cold case unit in the 2010s, described the challenge: "We're working with evidence that's nearly 40 years old. The world has changed, but the questions remain. Who did this? And why?" Forensic technology leaps forward. Since 1982, forensic science has advanced in ways the original investigators could only imagine. DNA analysis, once in its infancy, is now a cornerstone of crime solving. Chemical analysis techniques have become more sensitive and precise. Digital databases allow for rapid comparisons and cross-referencing of evidence. In the Tylenol case, forensic scientists revisited capsule residues, packaging fragments, and cyanide traces. Although no direct DNA evidence was found on the pills or bottles, labs applied modern chemical fingerprinting to trace the source of the cyanide, narrowing down possible origins. Re-examining the extortionist. James W. Lewis, the man convicted for mailing the extortion letter, remains a figure of interest. While no direct link to the murders was ever proven, his criminal record and connection to the case make him a subject of ongoing scrutiny. Investigators reviewed old interviews, looking for inconsistencies or new clues. Lewis denied involvement until his death in the 2010s, maintaining he was only trying to profit from the panic. Still, some believe he might have had a deeper role. New theories and suspects. Over the years, amateur sleuths, journalists, and true crime enthusiasts have proposed new theories, often focusing on individuals with access to cyanide or those with motives tied to the pharmaceutical industry. Some investigators have revisited employees from manufacturing plants and distribution centers. Others have explored psychological profiles suggesting the killer was a local resident with specific knowledge of product distribution. While none of these theories have been definitively proven, they have sparked renewed interest and sometimes prompted re-examination of archival evidence. Public interest and cold case reviews. Cold case units around the country have benefited from public interest in historical crimes. Documentaries, podcasts, and online forums keep the discussion alive, sometimes encouraging witnesses or relatives to come forward. In Chicago, police occasionally release new requests for information, hoping time might soften fears or bring new eyes to old evidence. Detective Monroe has spoken publicly about the importance of community support. Lessons for modern law enforcement. The Tylenol murders have become a case study in the challenges of product tampering investigations. They highlight the importance of rapid response, interagency cooperation, and forensic innovation. Law enforcement agencies have since developed specialized protocols for similar cases, including protocols for public warnings, evidence collection, and suspect profiling. The human element. Despite the scientific and procedural advances, the case remains about people, victims, families, investigators, and communities. Detective Monroe reflected, "This isn't just about evidence. It's about justice for lives cut short and peace for those left behind." Families continue to remember their loved ones through memorials and advocacy for safety. The hope remains that one day, new evidence or a breakthrough might finally bring the case to a close. Continuing impact on consumer safety. The Tylenol murders' influence on product safety still resonates. The triple seal packaging standard is now an industry baseline. Consumer vigilance has increased, and the pharmaceutical industry continually innovates to prevent tampering and contamination. As medicine becomes more complex, the lessons from 1982 remind us that safety must evolve alongside technology. The enduring mystery. More than 40 years later, the Chicago Tylenol murders sit in the shadows of history, an unsolved crime that changed the world in unexpected ways. The question lingers, will science or human memory one day uncover the truth? Until then, the story serves as a cautionary tale, a reminder of both the dangers lurking in everyday life and the resilience of communities facing tragedy. Reinventing safety, the pharmaceutical industry responds. The Tylenol murders of 1982 sent shockwaves not just through Chicago, but through the entire pharmaceutical industry. The unprecedented crime exposed glaring vulnerabilities in how over-the-counter medicines were packaged, distributed, and trusted by millions. In the weeks and months that followed, companies, regulators, and lawmakers scrambled to rebuild confidence in consumer products. The stakes were high not only in terms of public health but also the future of the industry itself. The triple seal breakthrough. One of the most immediate and visible changes was the introduction of tamper-evident packaging. Johnson & Johnson's swift move to implement a triple seal system consisting of a glued box, a plastic seal around the bottle neck, and a foil seal covering the mouth of the bottle became the new gold standard. Before 1982, seals and packaging were often minimal and easily compromised. The triple seal offered a clear, unmistakable signal if a product had been tampered with, giving consumers confidence that their medicine was safe. Other pharmaceutical companies quickly followed suit, adopting similar or improved designs. What started as an emergency response became an industry-wide standard. FDA regulations and federal oversight. The Food and Drug Administration, FDA, moved to formalize tamper-evident packaging requirements. By 1983, new federal regulations mandated such protections for all over-the-counter medications sold in the United States. These regulations detailed what constituted adequate tamper evidence and required manufacturers to submit compliance plans. The regulatory changes were some of the most significant in consumer safety since the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906. Industry innovation accelerates. The crisis sparked a wave of innovation. Beyond seals, companies began exploring new technologies, chemical markers inside capsules that could detect tampering, advanced plastics with embedded sensors, and unique serial numbering for better tracking. Manufacturers also enhanced quality control measures throughout production and distribution chains. The goal was to minimize the chance of tampering at any point before the medicine reached the consumer. Supply chain transparency. The murders highlighted weaknesses in the supply chain. Medicines could be purchased, tampered with, and returned to shelves without detection. In response, companies tightened controls on returned products and implemented better tracking systems. Pharmacies and stores established clearer protocols for handling returned items, and many began using security cameras, a rarity in the early 1980s. These changes helped prevent future incidents of product tampering and theft. Public education and awareness. Pharmaceutical companies, health organizations, and government agencies launched public education campaigns. These programs taught consumers to check seals, report suspicious products, and be cautious with medicines. Schools incorporated lessons on medication safety, emphasizing the importance of adult supervision and vigilance. Public health messaging stressed that while tampering was rare, awareness could save lives. Rebuilding consumer trust. Rebuilding trust after such a traumatic event was not easy. Many consumers remained wary for years, hesitant to purchase medicines without triple seals or clear safety marks. Johnson & Johnson's transparent handling of the crisis helped restore confidence faster than expected. The company's recall, public apologies, and rapid innovation demonstrated responsibility and commitment. Other companies learned similar lessons: honesty, responsiveness, and consumer safety must come first. A legacy in product safety. The changes spurred by the Tylenol murders extended beyond medicine. Food products, cosmetics, and household items began adopting tamper-evident packaging. The idea that consumers had a right to safe, untampered goods became a widely accepted principle. Today's grocery store shelves are filled with products bearing safety seals, a direct legacy of the lessons learned from 1982. Continuing vigilance. Despite improvements, the possibility of tampering never fully disappeared. Product recalls and contamination scares still occur, but with stricter regulations and better technology, such incidents are usually caught quickly. The pharmaceutical industry's ongoing challenge is to balance accessibility with security, ensuring medicines are easy to use but difficult to compromise. Remembering the cost. Behind every regulation and innovation lies the memory of the victims. Their tragic deaths were a painful catalyst for change but ensured safer products for millions. Families of the victims continue to advocate for safety and awareness, honoring their loved ones by preventing future tragedies. The Tylenol murders remain a stark reminder: safety is not guaranteed, it must be built, maintained, and fiercely protected. Rebuilding trust and changing law enforcement. The Tylenol murders left a deep scar on the American public. For many, the trust they had in a simple bottle of pain relief was shattered. The idea that something so ordinary could hide a deadly threat changed how people viewed not only medicine but consumer products in general. The erosion of trust. In the months after the crisis, many consumers stopped buying over-the-counter medicines altogether. Parents in particular became wary of giving their children any medication without double-checking the packaging or choosing alternative remedies. Pharmacies reported a marked decrease in Tylenol sales, with some customers demanding refunds or switching brands entirely. This mistrust was not easily repaired. Even after tamper-evident packaging became standard, skepticism lingered. For many, the fear planted by the murders endured far longer than the crisis itself. Law enforcement adapts. For police and federal agencies, the Tylenol murders exposed major gaps in handling product tampering cases. Prior to 1982, there were no established protocols for investigating poisoned consumer goods on this scale. The Chicago Police Department, the FBI, and other agencies worked to develop specialized procedures for evidence collection, crime scene management, and public communication. Their goal was to act swiftly and transparently to prevent panic and catch perpetrators before more harm could occur. Interagency cooperation. One of the lessons from the Tylenol investigation was the importance of coordination between local, state, and federal authorities. The scale of the case required multiple agencies to share information and resources efficiently. This experience led to formal partnerships and task forces dedicated to similar crimes. The Department of Justice developed guidelines for product tampering investigations, which have been refined over the years to incorporate advances in technology and forensic science. Public communication. Effective communication became a crucial part of law enforcement response. Officials learned that clear, honest updates helped calm public fears and encouraged cooperation. Press conferences, hotlines, and public advisories became standard tools in managing product tampering cases. Agencies also worked closely with manufacturers and retailers to monitor supply chains and distribute safety information quickly. Legal reforms. The Tylenol murders spurred legislative changes at both state and federal levels. Product tampering was made a federal offense, carrying severe penalties including lengthy prison sentences and hefty fines. States passed their own laws to address tampering, creating a legal framework that prioritized consumer safety and deterrence. These laws also empowered agencies to act swiftly in emergency situations. Training and preparedness. Law enforcement agencies began incorporating product tampering scenarios into their training programs. Detectives, crime scene technicians, and emergency responders learned to identify signs of tampering, collect evidence safely, and protect public health. These efforts have paid off. Since the Tylenol case, responses to similar threats have been faster, more coordinated, and more effective. Ongoing vigilance. Despite improvements, authorities remain aware that product tampering is a persistent threat. Cases involving poisoned food, beverages, and medicines still occur, though rarely with the scale or impact of the Tylenol murders. Law enforcement continues to update protocols and collaborate with industry partners to prevent future tragedies. The legacy of 1982 drives this vigilance. The role of consumers. The Tylenol murders also shifted responsibility toward consumers. Public education campaigns emphasized the importance of checking seals, reporting suspicious products, and staying informed about recalls and safety alerts. Consumers became active participants in protecting their own safety, partnering with authorities and manufacturers to spot and prevent tampering. Healing through change. Ultimately, the tragedy forced society to confront uncomfortable truths about vulnerability and trust. The reforms that followed, better packaging, stronger laws, improved investigation methods, were born from loss but aimed at healing. For the victims' families, these changes provided some measure of comfort. Though justice remained elusive, the knowledge that their loved ones had saved future lives offered solace. Looking forward. Today, the Tylenol murders serve as a powerful reminder of the need for constant vigilance and innovation in consumer safety and law enforcement. The case is studied by criminologists, public health officials, and business leaders alike. Its lessons continue to inform policies and practices, ensuring that products are safer and that agencies are better prepared to respond to threats. Legacy of vigilance. More than 4 decades have passed since the tragic Chicago Tylenol murders of 1982, yet their impact remains undeniable. The case stands as a sobering reminder of how fragile public trust can be, and how vigilance, innovation, and collective responsibility are essential in safeguarding everyday life. Unsolved but not forgotten. The poisonings remain officially unsolved. The killer was never found, and the mystery endures. Despite advances in forensic science and renewed investigations, no new evidence has conclusively identified the perpetrator. This unsolved status leaves a lingering shadow over the case, one that haunts families and investigators alike. Yet, the lack of closure has not diminished the case's significance. Instead, it has reinforced the urgency of preventing similar tragedies and keeping consumer safety front and center. A turning point for consumer safety. Before 1982, product tampering was an overlooked risk. The Tylenol murders transformed that perception overnight. The introduction of tamper-evident packaging, new federal regulations, and public awareness campaigns fundamentally changed how products are packaged, sold, and trusted. Today, safety seals on medicine bottles, food packages, and other consumer goods are so common that we barely notice them. Yet, their presence is a direct result of the hard lessons learned from those dark days in Chicago. Corporate responsibility redefined. Johnson & Johnson's response to the crisis became a model of corporate responsibility. Their immediate nationwide recall, transparency with the public, and investment in safer packaging earned widespread respect. This crisis shaped how companies handle emergencies and communicate with consumers. The emphasis on honesty, accountability, and proactive safety measures became the new standard for business ethics. Law enforcement's evolving approach. The case also forced law enforcement agencies to rethink how they approach product tampering and poisoning cases. The protocols developed in the wake of the Tylenol murders have improved investigation efficiency, interagency collaboration, and public communication. These improvements have saved lives in subsequent cases and created a framework that continues to evolve with technology and changing threats. Cultural imprint. The Tylenol murders left a lasting imprint on popular culture. They have been referenced in books, television, and films as an example of random violence and the vulnerability of everyday life. The case fueled public fears but also inspired vigilance and advocacy. The story continues to resonate because it speaks to universal fears about safety and trust, concerns that remain relevant today. Remembering the victims. Above all, the legacy honors the 7 victims whose lives were cruelly taken. Their names and stories are remembered in memorials, educational programs, and public discussions about safety. Their tragedy spurred changes that protect millions, turning a dark moment into a catalyst for progress. The ongoing challenge. Though the specific case remains open, the challenges raised by the Tylenol murders endure. New threats to consumer safety emerge regularly, from contaminated foods to counterfeit medicines. The lessons of 1982 remind us that safety is never guaranteed. It requires constant attention, innovation, and cooperation among manufacturers, regulators, law enforcement, and consumers. A call to vigilance. The Chicago Tylenol murders compel us to remain vigilant and proactive. Trust in everyday products is precious and must be protected. As technology advances and consumer products evolve, so too must our commitment to safety. The memory of those lost in 1982 urges us never to become complacent. Final thoughts. The Tylenol murders were a tragedy of random cruelty that shocked a nation. Though the killer was never caught, the case's impact transformed how society protects itself. Through innovation, regulation, and awareness, a safer future was forged from devastating loss. The legacy of vigilance continues, a testament to the resilience of communities and the power of change born from tragedy. The Chicago Tylenol murders of 1982 were a shocking and tragic series of poisonings that resulted in 7 deaths from cyanide-laced capsules. Despite a massive investigation, the perpetrator was never identified or caught. The case exposed serious vulnerabilities in consumer product safety and sparked widespread fear across the nation. In response, Johnson & Johnson swiftly recalled all Tylenol products nationwide and introduced triple-seal tamper-evident packaging, setting a new industry standard. The FDA implemented regulations requiring tamper-proof packaging for over-the-counter medicines. Laws were strengthened to criminalize product tampering with severe penalties. The murders had a lasting impact beyond packaging. They transformed corporate crisis management, public awareness about consumer safety, and law enforcement protocols for investigating product tampering crimes. Though unsolved, the tragedy led to important changes that have made medicine and other consumer products safer for millions of people. The victims' deaths remain a sobering reminder of the need for constant vigilance in protecting public health and trust.